I used to believe my marriage was unshakable. For years, my husband and I built a life together. Long dinners filled with laughter, vacations where we held hands like newlyweds, and a home that felt like a fortress of love. But if there's one thing life has taught me, it's this: betrayal never comes from your enemies. It comes from the person lying next to you at night. The first signs were small, subtle, things I almost ignored. Hi, I'm Aria. I'm about to share my story, but before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It started with my husband's late nights. At first, I assumed he was working late at the office. But when he came home, he didn't smell like work. He smelled different. His cologne, a faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine, and sometimes the faintest whiff of alcohol. I brushed it off. Marriage isn't perfect, right? But soon it wasn't just late nights. He started guarding his phone like it was a state secret. If it buzzed, he'd rush to grab it before I could even glance at the screen. He took calls outside, whispering in the garage or pacing the backyard under the cover of darkness. I remember one night, hearing his voice through the thin crack of our bedroom door. His tone was low, but sharp, like a man plotting something. I couldn't catch the words, but my instinct screamed. Something was wrong. At first, I thought the obvious. Another woman. My heart ached with the thought of him betraying me with someone else. But as the weeks passed, I noticed something even more disturbing. He wasn't just hiding calls. He was suddenly interested in my finances. He asked strange questions about my savings, the house, my investments. Questions he never cared about before. And then, I noticed the transactions. Small at first, but frequent. Money leaving our joint account in odd amounts, shuffled around like pieces in a game of chess. When I confronted him, he brushed it off with excuses. Just moving things for a tax purpose. Don't worry about it. But I did worry. So one night, when he left his laptop open on the counter, I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I snooped. And what I found shattered me. Emails between him and a lawyer. Draft documents. Hidden accounts. Detailed discussions about assets, my assets. He wasn't planning an affair. He was planning a divorce. A brutal one. One designed to strip me of everything I had worked for. I sat there in silence, staring at the glowing screen, my heart pounding like it would crack my ribs. I realized the man I trusted, the man I loved, wasn't preparing to leave me with dignity. He was preparing to leave me with nothing. And in that moment, a part of me broke. But another part awakened. Because if he wanted war, I wasn't about to surrender. I was about to fight. The night I discovered his plan, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. Every word in those emails replayed in my head like a nightmare on repeat. Divorce, asset division, hidden accounts, fraud. I kept thinking, how long has he been planning this? Was it weeks? Months? Maybe even years? Every smile, every kiss, every "I love you" suddenly felt like a rehearsed line in a play I didn't know I was in. I wanted to scream, to wake him up and demand answers. But something inside me whispered, don't. Not yet. If I confronted him now, he'd cover his tracks, hide the evidence, and lock me out of the game he thought he controlled. No, if I wanted to win, I had to be smarter. So, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I rolled over, curled up next to him, and pretended to sleep. Pretended I didn't know that the man beside me was plotting my destruction. And the very next morning, I began to plot his. The first call I made wasn't to a friend or my family. It was to a lawyer. A woman recommended by a colleague who had gone through her own nightmare divorce and come out victorious. Sitting in her office, I poured out everything. My suspicions, the late-night calls, the transactions, and finally, the damning emails. She listened quietly, her sharp eyes narrowing with every detail. When I finished, she leaned forward and said words that gave me my first glimmer of hope. He's underestimating you. That's his mistake. And we're going to use it against him. She explained that his hidden accounts and secret transfers weren't just suspicious. They were illegal. Financial deception in a divorce is a crime. One judges do not look kindly on. But before we could strike, we needed to protect what was mine. That night, while he was working late, again I acted. I moved my personal savings into a separate, protected account in my name only. Accounts he couldn't touch, couldn't drain. My lawyer guided me every step, ensuring everything was done legally. I transferred the title of the small property my parents left me into a trust. I restructured my investments so they were shielded from any sudden claims. Piece by piece, I built a wall around my life. It felt like playing a dangerous game of chess in the dark. Every move had to be quiet, calculated, invisible. One wrong step, and he'd know. And all the while, I played the part of the loving wife. Cooking dinner, smiling, asking about his day, pretending I didn't notice the way his phone lit up with unknown numbers. Inside, I was a storm. Protecting my assets wasn't enough. I needed proof, undeniable evidence that he was the one scheming, not me. So I started collecting. Screenshots of emails, copies of bank statements, records of late-night withdrawals. I even placed a discreet recording app on a spare phone and left it near him while he took one of his private calls in the garage. And what I caught made my blood run cold. "She'll never see it coming," he whispered to his lawyer. "By the time she finds out, it'll be too late. Everything will already be in my name." The arrogance in his voice, the confidence, it was like listening to a stranger. The man who once promised to protect me was plotting to destroy me, smiling while he did it. I saved every word, every shred of evidence. Because if he wanted war, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to crush his entire plan. The hardest part? Pretending nothing was wrong. Every morning, I made him coffee. Every night, I kissed him goodnight. I even laughed at his jokes, knowing full well that behind those smiles was a man rehearsing how he'd take everything from me. There were moments I almost broke. One night, he came home late, reeking of whiskey. He stumbled into bed, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Don't worry, babe. Everything's going to be fine soon." My fists clenched under the sheets. My heart screamed to confront him, to throw his lies in his face. But I didn't, because I had learned something he hadn't. Patience is power. 1 week. That's all it took. 1 week of secret meetings with my lawyer, of transferring assets, of gathering evidence. 1 week of playing the role of the loyal wife while quietly becoming untouchable. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. He came home one evening, smug, almost glowing with confidence. He poured himself a drink, sat down on the couch, and said casually, "We need to talk." My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. Here it is, I thought. The betrayal unveiled. He launched into a rehearsed speech, his words dripping with fake concern. He talked about how we'd grown apart, how he needed a fresh start, how he hoped I'd understand. And then the dagger. "Of course, I'll make sure you're taken care of. You won't be left with nothing." I wanted to laugh, or scream. Instead, I simply nodded, letting him believe he was in control. Because what he didn't know was that every card in his hand had already been marked. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood by the window, looking out into the dark street below. I should have felt broken, betrayed. But instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Power. He thought he was the predator, circling his prey. But he was wrong. I wasn't prey. I was the storm he never saw coming. And 1 week later, when he filed the divorce papers and tried to play his game in court, he would learn just how badly he had underestimated me. Because I wasn't just defending myself. I was about to destroy him. When he finally served me the divorce papers, I didn't cry. I made tea. I set the kettle down gently, watched the steam curl into the morning light, and read the paperwork like a woman reading a weather report about a storm she'd already sandbagged the house for. His attorney's name gleamed at the top like polished brass. The packet was thick. Demands, disclosures, declarations, painted in the soft language of fairness that tried to hide the sharp teeth beneath. He'd filed quickly, confident. The way gamblers push all their chips in because they've convinced themselves the next card will be theirs. I called my lawyer. "It's time," I said. "It is," she replied. "And we're ready." Courtrooms have a specific kind of cold, a clean, clinical chill that keeps emotion at arm's length. The woods smelled like disinfectant and old stories. He sat 2 rows ahead with his attorney, crisp suit, jaw tight, eyes forward. He didn't look back. I suppose pride wouldn't let him. My lawyer slid a binder onto the table. Not thick, not flashy. Precise. Labeled tabs, color-coded. Evidence that didn't shout. Evidence that whispered calmly and killed loudly. His attorney stood first, reciting a script I could have written in my sleep. My client seeks an equitable division. He has reason to believe substantial assets were moved. We request an immediate order freezing accounts and returning community funds. I kept my face neutral. Let him talk. Let him build the stage for the reveal. When it was our turn, my lawyer rose, adjusted her glasses, and began not with emotion, but with a timeline. Dates. Amounts. Transfers. "Your Honor," she said, her voice level. "We do not dispute that assets have moved. We dispute why." My client took lawful steps to protect premarital and inherited property after discovering an ongoing scheme by the petitioner to divert community funds to undisclosed accounts and shell entities in violation of fiduciary duties owed to a spouse. She opened the binder, flipped to the first tab, and handed the judge a packet. Exhibit A, an email chain between my husband and his attorney, redacted where appropriate, but clear in its meaning. A plan to time the filing so that accounts could be drained before temporary restraining orders. Those quiet guardrails that switch on the moment you file could stop him. Exhibit B, bank statements tracing money from our joint account into an LLC I'd never heard of, Nerthus Consulting, LLC, then out again in little organized streams to a private brokerage. Exhibit C, a spreadsheet from a forensic accountant. Yes, I hired one, mapping the money like footprints in fresh snow. Transfers at odd hours. Round numbers. One repeated memo line. Q4 tax prep. In May. Exhibit D, a short, clipped audio file. His voice in the garage. The same garage where I once hung a string of white lights for summer nights. "She'll never see it coming," he said. "By the time the papers hit, I'll have it all in place." Silence settled on the room like dust. His attorney coughed. Your Honor, we'd like to reserve." The judge raised a hand. "You'll have your turn." I stared at the tall clock mounted near the bench and counted the steady seconds. For once, time wasn't a threat. It was a companion. We didn't request drama. We asked for something simpler and more devastating. Sanctions for concealment and breach of fiduciary duty, an order compelling immediate disclosure of all accounts, appointment of a neutral to oversee unwinding transfers, and, because pride is expensive, attorney's fees. The judge took it under advisement and set a date for evidentiary hearing. He looked at my husband then. "Disclosure means everything. If your house isn't clean by then, counsel, bring a broom." Outside the courtroom, he finally met my eyes. The first flicker of confusion lived there. A tiny fracture. I didn't blink. Divorce isn't a burst of lightning. It's weather. Systems moving and colliding. Discovery is where the barometric pressure drops. We traded requests and responses, calendars and data dumps. I turned over my statements and documents with the quiet confidence of a person who knows her house is in order. He stalled, hedged, produced partials. My lawyer filed motions to compel. The judge signed them. Deadlines snapped shut like mousetraps. Then the emails began to tell their story. Nerthus Consulting, it turned out, had one member, my husband. Its business address was a rented mailbox. The brokerage account was for consulting revenue, though there were no invoices, no contracts, no business, just our money wearing new clothes. Money that had stepped out of our marriage like a friend in a borrowed coat, assuming I wouldn't notice. But the thing about forensic accountants? They notice everything. They found the path from joint account to LLC to brokerage to a cashier's check. They found the check deposited into yet another account. And they found something else. Something he hadn't even tried to hide because he thought it was invisible. A wallet. Cryptocurrency. He'd bought in pieces, tiny bites, $900 here, $1,200 there, like a man picking at leftovers in the fridge. The wallet ID was consistent across trades. A breadcrumb trail in a forest he thought no one could navigate. We mapped it. We tied it back. We printed it. We tabbed it, color-coded. And then we subpoenaed the exchange. The return came in a thick envelope. I slid it open at my kitchen table and stared at the numbers. Large positions. Timing that matched the bank outflows. Growth that he'd planned to harvest after I was locked out. I breathed, slow and steady. Let's add it, I told my lawyer. There's a strange intimacy in watching someone lie under oath. He sat across from my lawyer at a polished conference table, a bottle of water sweating next to his elbow. The court reporter's keys clicked softly, a metronome in the background. Have you transferred any assets outside of your marital accounts in the last 6 months? My lawyer asked. He paused. Too long. Not that I recall. Do you own, directly or indirectly, an interest in Nerthus Consulting, LLC? Another pause. He shifted, pulled at his collar. I've done some consulting, yes. Where are the invoices? We agreed verbally. Who is we? He said a name. It was fiction. We knew it. We had the exchange's documents, the KYC forms. The LLC had no clients. It had one purpose, to be a bucket. My lawyer didn't raise her voice. She lowered it. Do you have any digital assets? His jaw flexed. No. She slid a page across the table. On it, a transaction hash and the last 4 digits of the exchange account ID. He stared at the page. The lie in his throat struggled like a bird against glass. He looked at me then, not at my lawyer, not at the paper, at me. This time the fracture was wider. A crack that let the truth whisper out. You were never supposed to be able to do this. You're under oath, my lawyer said. He exhaled. Yes, I have digital assets. How much? He swallowed. Named a number. Try again, she said, and slid the full printout across the table. Silence. Then, that amount. The reporter's keys clicked faster. Back in court, the judge had the look of a man who'd seen the story before and was tired of reruns. My lawyer walked through the chain like a surgeon. Joint account, LLC, brokerage, crypto, transfers after late-night calls, the audio file, the emails. She never pushed into melodrama. The facts were loud enough. His attorney tried to lean on intent, that slippery word men use when the evidence says action. He was exploring options, he said. He did not intend to deprive. The judge held up a palm. Counsel, the chronology is not ambiguous, and neither are your client's obligations. Then he turned to me. Ma'am, did you transfer any premarital or separate assets into protective accounts after discovering these facts? Yes, Your Honor. On counsel's advice, and within the law. Do you have documentation? We do. My lawyer handed it up. Inheritance documentation, trust schedules, prenup addendum. We had won, and suddenly it mattered. And clean transfers, all post-discovery, all traceable. The judge nodded. That's how you do it. He issued orders that landed like steel. Full disgorgement of undisclosed accounts into a neutral trust. Appointment of a special master to unwind the transfers. An accounting of the digital wallet, with market adjustments credited back to the community. Sanctions for non-disclosure. Attorney's fees. Divorce is not a scavenger hunt, he said. Eyes on my husband. It is a legal process. You owe your spouse a fiduciary duty. You failed. The court will remedy that failure. The gavel didn't drop. It rarely does outside of movies, but the sound of my husband's chest did. I saw it in the slope of his shoulders. The storm had passed. Not the kind that howls and leaves splinters. The kind that erodes slowly, carrying away the sand beneath the house until it simply can't stand anymore. Men like him always try to salvage pride in the ashes. His attorney asked to discuss settlement. Mine agreed. We sat in a windowless room with bad fluorescent lights and poured hours into numbers until the equation finally balanced. He would relinquish claims to my inheritance and the trust. The house, yes, the one he thought he'd seize, would be refinanced in my name, equity adjusted by credits from the disgorged accounts he'd hoped to hide. Retirement accounts equalized. The crypto? Liquidated under court supervision. Gains split after crediting the amounts he tried to siphon back to me first. Attorney's fees paid. No alimony from me. Limited, temporary maintenance from him. Ironically, because all his consulting had left his documented income irregular and mine stable. Pride has an expensive taste. We initialed pages, crossed out language, argued over commas. It ended with signatures. Not triumph, not joy. Something better. Certainty. We stood in the parking lot, the settlement still warm from the copier. The sky was the color of steel wool, clouds snagged on distant buildings. He finally spoke first. You blindsided me. I tilted my head. You were counting on it. He laughed once, humorless. You are never this cold. I'm not cold, I said. I'm done. He shoved his hands in his pockets. There was never anyone else. I know, I said. In some ways, that's worse. He frowned. Why? Because it wasn't love you chased. It was money. You didn't want out of the marriage. You wanted out with everything. He stared at the asphalt. I didn't think you'd. I know, I said softly. You didn't think I'd be the storm. For a heartbeat, I remembered the man I married. How he made pancakes on Sundays, the way he laughed with his head thrown back. Then I remembered the garage whisper. She'll never see it coming. The memory settled the scales. Take care of yourself, I said, and learn to keep promises, even to people you don't love anymore. He didn't answer. Some silences are confessions. People ask what victory feels like. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like a quiet kitchen, a clean table, papers filed and put away. It feels like waking up without that sudden drop in your stomach, the one that whispers everything you built is about to be stolen. I refinanced the house, painted the bedroom a color that felt like new rain. I took the string lights out of the garage and hung them in the backyard again. I stood there one evening with a mug of tea and breathed in a life that belonged to me fully, finally, legally, and emotionally. And then I called the forensic accountant and the lawyer and said thank you, because good people carried me through a season where the person who promised to protect me tried to make me small. I made a donation to a legal clinic that helps women who can't afford the fight. I kept the binder, tabs and all, on a shelf as a reminder that silence is not the same as surrender, and patience is not the same as permission. I learned new rituals. Sunday mornings weren't for pancakes anymore. They were for long walks and long thoughts. I started a separate account labeled Future. Not because I needed it now, but because I like the way the word looks in black ink. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the moment he told the garage that I'd never see it coming. It used to hurt. Now it's a lesson. Betrayal is a teacher, yes, but so is survival. If you're listening to this and you feel the hairline cracks forming in your life, if the late nights and the guarded phone and the questions about your money have started to add up, hear me. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not weak for noticing. Protect yourself. Don't announce the fire drill to the person holding the matches. Find counsel. Document everything. Act within the law. Let evidence speak where emotion wants to scream. You are not the villain for refusing to be robbed. And if you're the one planning the quiet theft, if you've convinced yourself that you deserve it, that you can stage manage a person's life like a business deal, remember the man in my garage. Remember the way the judge said divorce is not a scavenger hunt. Remember that the person you underestimate might be the person you taught how to win. I used to think the scariest word in marriage was forever. It isn't. The scariest word is almost. We almost made it. He almost took everything. I almost broke. But almost is not what defines us. What defines us are the choices we make when the mask comes off. He chose deception. I chose the law, the truth, and myself. And 1 week after I moved my assets, the only plan that backfired was his. Because I wasn't prey. I was the storm he never saw coming.